An elderly man sitting in a square. 85 years later, a detail in his hand changes everything. In the dusty archives of the Museum of the City of New York, Dr. Elena Rodriguez examined historical photographs from the 1930s. It was March 2024, and she had been spending weeks cataloging images for an exhibition about the Great Depression. "Another photo of Washington Square Park," she murmured, lifting a black and white image dated February 1939. In the foreground, an elderly man of about 70 wore a dark coat and felt hat. His face, marked by deep wrinkles, looked toward the camera with an indecipherable expression. The elderly man had his hands clasped over his lap, and something about that posture caught Elena's attention. She had seen hundreds of photographs from that era, but this man seemed to be waiting for something specific. How strange, she thought, bringing the magnifying glass closer. Most photos show families or groups. This man is completely alone. According to the records, the photograph had been donated in 1987 by the Patterson family, former residents of Greenwich Village. There was no information about the elderly man's identity or the circumstances of the image. "Dr. Mitchell," she called to her colleague, "could you come here for a moment?" James Mitchell, a specialist in urban history, approached with curiosity. "What have you found, Elena?" "This photograph. There's something different about it. This man doesn't seem like a simple passerby. Look at his eyes." Mitchell examined the image. "You're right. There's determination there, as if he were posing deliberately." He paused. 1939 was when World War II began. Many European refugees were arriving in New York. "Exactly," Elena nodded. "But why would someone take a photograph of a stranger alone in a park? Unless he wasn't a stranger," Mitchell murmured. "Eleanor, I think you should investigate more about this photo." That night, Eleanor couldn't get the image out of her head. One question resonated. Who was that man? And why did someone consider it important to photograph him on that cold afternoon in 1939? The next day, Elena arrived early with her high-powered magnifying glass and specialized LED lamp. She placed the photograph on the light table and began a meticulous examination. The wooden bench, the dry leaves, the bare trees in the background, everything seemed authentic for a winter afternoon in 1939. Then she moved the magnifying glass toward the elderly man's hands. "What is that?" she whispered, adjusting the focus. Between the man's interlaced fingers, partially hidden by the shadow of his coat, there was a small rectangular object. It had defined edges, too uniform to be common paper. Its shiny surface reflected light in a peculiar way. Eleanor scanned the photograph in high resolution and digitally enlarged the hands section. The numbers became clear. 1947. "That's impossible," she murmured with trembling hands. The photograph was dated February 1939, but the object showed 1947, 8 years in the future. She verified the back of the photograph. The ink from February 1939 was consistent with the era, including notes about the weather conditions of that specific day. Elena immediately called Mitchell. "James, I need you to come now. I found something extraordinary." When Mitchell arrived, Elena showed him her discoveries. Her colleague observed the enlarged image in silence. "Elena," he finally said, "this defies all logic. Are you sure it's not later manipulation?" "I've verified everything. The photograph is authentic, the date is correct, and that object shows 1947. Mitchell rubbed his beard thoughtfully. "Do you know what this means? If that man had something in 1939 that showed the year 1947, then he knew something about the future," Elena completed, "or he was part of something much bigger." Both contemplated the implications. The photograph was no longer nostalgia from the past. It had become an enigma that challenged their historical understanding. "Eleanor," Mitchell said slowly, "I think we're on the edge of something that could change our understanding of what was happening in New York during those critical years." Eleanor and Mitchell decided to contact the Patterson family, original donors of the photograph. After several calls, they located Margaret Patterson Wilson in Queens. Margaret, 65 years old, received them in her house full of antiques. "My grandparents lived in the village for 40 years. They collected neighborhood photographs as a hobby." Elena showed the elderly man's image. Margaret studied it carefully. "I don't specifically recognize him, but my grandparents bought photos from street photographers or found them at estate sales." "Did your grandparents mention European refugees or unusual activities in the neighborhood?" Mitchell asked. "Curiously, yes. My grandmother told stories about the mysterious men in the park. She said there was something strange about their behavior, always alone, always watching." Margaret disappeared into the attic and returned with a dusty box. "Here are my grandmother's diaries from 1938 to 1942. Elena opened the first notebook until reaching February 1939. "There's something here," she murmured. "Listen, February 15th, 1939. Today, I saw the man in the black coat again. He was at his usual bench, but this time he had something in his hands. At exactly 3:17, a young woman approached, sat briefly, and left. The exchange lasted less than 2 minutes. Mitchell and Elena looked at each other. It was a meeting point, Elena whispered. They continued reading. They found several references to the man in the black coat with consistent patterns, brief encounters, quick exchanges, cautious behavior. The most revealing entry was dated March 1st, 1939. "The man in the black coat no longer comes. Yesterday I saw 2 men in dark suits asking about him at the bakery. They showed a photograph. It was him, no doubt." Elena closed the diary slowly. This man was part of something bigger, and someone was looking for him. "And now so are we," Mitchell added. Margaret watched them, fascinated. "Do you really think that after 85 years this still matters?" Elena held the photograph. "Something tells me this secret has been waiting to be discovered." After the revealing meeting with Margaret, Elena and Mitchell returned to the museum with a new perspective. Elena had digitized diary pages with specific dates and behavior patterns. "We need to search FBI archives," Mitchell declared. "If there were espionage activities, there must be records." Elena contacted Dr. Robert Chen, a specialist in declassified World War II documents at the National Archives. "An elderly man in Washington Square in 1939, Chen repeated over the phone. "That area was known as a meeting point for European refugees. Many were involved in anti-Nazi resistance networks. 3 days later, Chen called them with extraordinary news. "I found something fascinating. There's a file on Operation Sanctuary, a network of Jewish refugees and anti-fascists that operated from New York between 1938 and 1941. Elena felt her pulse accelerate. "Are there descriptions of the participants?" One of the main operatives was identified as the Observer. Male, approximately 70 years old, operated from Washington Square Park. Mitchell approached the phone. "Is there a physical description?" "Yes. Caucasian male, 1.70 meters, gray hair, always wore dark coat and felt hat. He communicated through coded objects." Elena almost dropped the phone. "It's him. What kind of coded objects?" "He used falsified identification cards with future dates as a coding method. The dates corresponded to operational plans scheduled for those years." Silence filled the room. Elena looked at the enlarged photograph where 1947 was clearly visible. "Is there a reference to what 1947 specifically meant?" Elena asked. "Here's the most intriguing part," Chen responded. 1947 was the target year for an operation called Phoenix. The plan was to establish a documentation center to preserve evidence of Nazi war crimes. Mitchell sat down slowly. "Eleanor, do you realize? That man not only knew what would happen in 1947, he was planning for it to happen. There's something more," Chen added. "The Observer mysteriously disappeared in March 1939. They never found him. After hanging up, they remained processing the magnitude of the discovery. They had found a forgotten hero whose work had helped change international justice. The revelation about Operation Sanctuary completely transformed the investigation." Elena decided to expand her search to Ellis Island immigration archives, looking for European refugees who matched the physical description. After hours filtering records from 1936 to 1938, Elena found something promising. "Look at this. Abraham Kowalski, Polish, 68 years old upon arrival in September 1937. Height, 170 meters. Gray hair, occupation, history professor." "The details match," Mitchell observed. "Is there an address in New York?" 154 Sullivan Street, Greenwich Village. 3 blocks from Washington Square Park. Sullivan Street had changed, but building 154 was still standing. Giuseppe Torino, the current manager, had worked in the area for 40 years. "Kowalski?" Giuseppe repeated. "That name sounds familiar. My father worked as a doorman here before me. He took them to the basement with boxes of old records. Papa never threw anything away. He said someday someone would come looking for history." Among yellowed bills they found the record. Abraham Kowalski had rented apartment 3B from October 1937 until March 1939. "March 1939, Elena exclaimed. "Exactly when he disappeared." Giuseppe looked at them with renewed curiosity. "My father told a strange story about that apartment. After Kowalski disappeared, the police came several times, but they never found anything because Papa had saved some belongings before they arrived." Elena felt her heart accelerate. Where are those belongings? In the same place where Papa hid them in 1939. He led them to a room hidden behind the boiler. There, wrapped in waxed canvas, was a small but heavy trunk. When they opened it, Elena held her breath. Inside were photographs, documents in various languages, and a collection of falsified identification cards with future dates: 1943, 1945, 1946, 1947, 1948. Mitchell, Elena whispered. He wasn't just an operative. He was the coordinator of the entire operation. At the bottom, they found a letter. If someone finds this, know that Abraham Kowalski died fighting against injustice. The dates represent the future he helped create. Elena lifted a photograph from the trunk. The same elderly man surrounded by young people, all smiling with determination. He didn't die alone, Elena murmured. He was part of a family of fighters. Abraham Kowalski's belongings revealed a more complex network than imagined. Among the documents they found addresses, code names, and a diagram of the organizational structure of Operation Sanctuary. Elena spread out the papers. Look at this, Mitchell. It was a sophisticated operation with cells in Manhattan, Brooklyn, and the Bronx. The diagram showed the observer as central coordinator, with lines toward 12 operatives. Each had bird-related names: the hawk, the dove, the raven. These addresses are strategically distributed near entry points, ports, stations, airports, Mitchell observed. Eleanor studied the dates on the cards. Each date corresponded to a phase: 1943 establishment of centers, 1945 evidence collection, 1947 testimony and trials. Among the documents were letters in Polish, German, and Yiddish. Elena contacted Professor Ruth Goldstein from Columbia to translate them. These aren't family letters, the professor murmured as she read them. They're intelligence reports. This one from January 1939. The packages have arrived from Warsaw. They confirm our worst fears. We need to accelerate Phoenix. What does packages from Warsaw mean? Elena asked. First-hand information about Poland. This letter is 8 months before the official invasion. They already knew what was coming. Mitchell took another letter in German. The professor translated. Heinrich confirms that the documents have been microfilmed. The copies are safe in 3 locations. The truth will find its way. The last letter in Yiddish was the most emotional. If you're reading this, our enemies have found me. Don't cry. My real life ended when I saw my library burn in Krakow. Here I found new purpose. The names are preserved. May memory be a blessing. The date, March 15th, 1939. 3 days after the last entry about his disappearance. He knew they were coming for him, Elena whispered. And he made sure the work would continue. Professor Goldstein carefully closed the letters. What you have here is testimony of one of the most heroic acts of resistance from the pre-war era. Abraham Kowalski saved lives and preserved history. Elena looked at the original photograph with new eyes. He's no longer just a man in a square. He's a guardian of memory. The documents revealed the sophisticated network, but a crucial piece was missing. What had happened exactly in March 1939? Elena returned to Grandmother Patterson's diary, looking for specific March entries. There's something here, she murmured. March 10th. I saw the red-haired girl again. She looked nervous, constantly looking over her shoulder. She sat on the bench for an hour, but he never appeared. The red-haired girl? Mitchell asked. Elena searched backwards. Yes, here, February 20th. The red-haired girl came again. The exchange was longer. They worked together, I'm sure. She continued to the most revealing entry. March 12th, 1939. I finally spoke with the red-haired girl. Her name is Sarah. She speaks with a European accent. She was crying. She told me her grandfather had disappeared. She gave me this to keep in case something happened to her, too. Attached to the diary was a small envelope, still sealed. With trembling hands, Elena opened it. Inside were a photograph and a note. The photograph showed 8 people in a library. Abraham Kowalski was in the center, surrounded by young people. In the corner, they recognized the red hair mentioned. The note said, "If something happens to Abraham and me, I want the world to know we weren't ordinary spies. We were librarians, professors, students. Abraham was a professor at the University of Krakow. I was his research assistant. When the Nazis burned our library, we swore we would never again allow history to be erased. The names are on the back. If we survive, we'll meet at the New York Public Library on the first day of spring 1947. Sarah Rosenberg, March 11th, 1939. Elena turned the photograph. 8 names with cities: Warsaw, Prague, Vienna, Berlin, Budapest. An international network of refugee academics. Mitchell observed, and Sarah planned to meet with survivors in 1947, the same date as Kowalski's card. Eleanor felt renewed determination. We have to find Sarah Rosenberg. That afternoon, they contacted the genealogical department of the Historical Society. With the note's information, they traced Sarah Rosenberg, arrived in 1937 from Krakow, worked as a librarian until 1943, when she donated a collection called Phoenix Archive. The Phoenix Archive? Elena exclaimed. The operation continued without Kowalski. The next day, they visited the New York Public Library. The Phoenix Archive occupied a complete section of the research basement. Dorothy Chen, the head librarian, received them with curiosity. The Phoenix Archive is one of our most consulted collections by Holocaust researchers, she explained. It was donated by Sarah Rosenberg in 1943. Is there a record of what happened to her after? Elena asked. Dorothy smiled mysteriously. Why don't you ask her yourself? Elena and Mitchell were stunned. Is she alive? Sarah Rosenberg Goldberg is 107 years old. She still comes once a month. In fact, she's coming tomorrow. At exactly 10 place the next day, a small woman in a wheelchair arrived. Sarah had snow-white hair, but penetrating green eyes. When she saw Elena and Mitchell waiting, she stopped. Who are these people? She asked with a slight European accent. Elena stepped forward, holding Abraham Kowalski's original photograph. Mrs. Goldberg, we believe you knew this man. Sarah took the photograph with trembling hands. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then tears rolled down her cheeks. Abraham, she whispered. My dear Abraham, where did you find this? We've been investigating his story. We found his belongings, letters, and your note in Mrs. Patterson's diary. Sarah looked at her with new intensity. After so many years, Mitchell sat in front of her. What happened to Abraham in March 1939? Sarah closed her eyes, gathering strength. We were betrayed. There was an infiltrator in our network, someone who pretended to be a refugee but worked for the Gestapo. The Gestapo operated in New York. Oh yes, she replied bitterly. They had cells directed at eliminating Jewish resistance networks. On March 11th, Abraham received warning that they had been compromised. She stopped to drink water. That was the last time I saw him. The next day, they found his body in the Hudson River. Elena felt a chill. His body. Officially suicide, but we knew the truth. Abraham would never have given up. They murdered him. And what did you do? What Abraham taught me. Protect the work. I took the documents, changed my name, moved constantly, but I continued collecting testimonies. Sarah smiled with fierce pride. Do you see that collection? Those documents helped convict war criminals. Abraham died, but his vision was completely realized. For 3 hours, Sarah Rosenberg Goldberg shared a story that completely transformed Elena and Mitchell's understanding of Abraham Kowalski and Operation Sanctuary. Abraham wasn't just a professor, Sarah began. In Krakow, he directed the most important Jewish historical archives in Poland. When the Nazis started burning libraries, he had already microfilmed thousands of documents. Elena took notes feverishly. Did he bring those documents to the United States? He sent copies through multiple routes, America, England, Palestine. He knew he couldn't risk all the evidence in one place. Sarah guided them to the Phoenix Archive. She pointed to the extensive shelves. All this began with Abraham's vision. The network was much larger than you imagine. Mitchell observed the collections. Did all the code names correspond to real people? Each one. All had the same mission. Preserve evidence so that when justice came, the world couldn't deny what had happened. Sarah pointed to a special section. After they killed Abraham, I became the coordinator. I was 24 years old and terrified, but he had trained me well. How did you keep the network functioning? I changed the structure. Instead of meetings, we used dead drops throughout the city. The Chen Laundry in Chinatown, the Goldstein bookstore, even the lost books department of this library. Elena was surprised. This library was part of the operation? The safest place to hide secret information is in a public library. Sarah guided them to a showcase containing a familiar card with 1947. This was Abraham's original card from the photograph. I managed to recover it after his death. The numbers. Did they mean something specific? 1947 wasn't just the target year. The other numbers were coordinates where we had hidden important documents. Sarah walked to photographs of the Nuremberg trials. Do you see that woman handing documents to the prosecutor? Elena looked closely. It was a young woman with red hair. That's me in 1947. I was 30 years old and finally fulfilling the promise I made to Abraham 8 years before. And after the trials, I continued the work. I married, had children, but never stopped collecting testimonies. Every survivor, every family, with all their voices are here. Eleanor looked at the vast archive. It's a living monument. It's Abraham Kowalski's legacy, Sarah corrected, and now you are the guardians of his story. 6 months later, Eleanor and Mitchell had transformed their discovery into the exhibition Guardians of Memory, The Secret History of Operation Sanctuary at the Museum of the City of New York. The exhibition began with Abraham Kowalski's original photograph, now framed as the centerpiece. A magnifying glass allowed visitors to examine the detail that had started everything, the card with 1947 in his hands. Elena watched a Jewish family reading the panels with tears. The grandmother approached. "Is it true that this man saved so many documents?" she asked with a European accent. "It's true," Elena responded. "Abraham Kowalski and his network preserved thousands of testimonies. My family was from Krakow. Maybe he knew my grandfather." Elena guided her to the interactive section where they could search names from the Phoenix archive. The screen showed Mordecai Goldstein, Krakow, testimony preserved by AK, 1938. The woman was breathless. "It's him. It's my grandfather. I thought nothing remained." Such moments repeated daily. Mitchell approached smiling. Young visitors are creating their own Phoenix archives with family stories. Eleanor observed a young Latina speaking to the camera. "My great-grandmother escaped from El Salvador. She could never tell her story because it was painful. But after seeing this, I understand that her silence was also resistance." That afternoon, they visited Sarah at her residence. "How do you feel seeing Abraham's story finally being told?" Elena asked. Sarah, now 108 years old, smiled. "I feel like I can rest. For 85 years, I've been the only guardian of his memory. Now there are thousands." Mitchell pointed to letters on the table. Letters from around the world, families finding connections, students learning about resistance, museums wanting to create similar exhibitions. "Your work with Abraham didn't end in 1947, Elena said. "It keeps growing." Sarah nodded. "That was his real vision. Not just preserve the past, but inspire the future. He wanted people to understand that resistance is sometimes simply refusing to allow truth to be forgotten." As the sun set, Elena reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a simple photograph. "Do you know what's most beautiful about all this?" Sarah said. "What?" they both asked. Sarah smiled with centennial wisdom. "Abraham thought he had failed when they killed him, but 85 years later we discover he had barely begun. His photograph was waiting to tell the complete story." Eleanor looked toward Washington Square Park in the distance. Some legacies simply need time to flourish. And Abraham Kowalski's story would continue inspiring future generations, just as he had planned from that cold afternoon in 1939.